Good morning. It is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome and thank all of you for your overwhelming response. We have received geographically participation from across India and abroad. The audience comprises of students of advertising and marketing, management students, professionals, a distinguished academician, and faculty members. Would like to introduce our guest speaker and our distinguished panel first. Our speaker of the day today, Dr. Sarindra Pratap Jain, is popularly known amongst his peer group as Shelley. Is James D. Curie Professor of Marketing and International Business at Foster School of Business, University of Washington. His research interests include brand strategy, psychological segmentation, consumer addiction, advertising, COVID, and influence of emotion on consumption. His work has appeared in leading journals like Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Research, Marketing Science, Journal of Consumer Psychology, and Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Process. He is an associate editor with Journal of Consumer Psychology, Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, and International Journal of Research in Marketing. He has won multiple teaching awards, has been cited as a 4-star teacher by Business Week, and has conducted executive education program for Microsoft, Boeing, 3M, Ingersoll Rand, and Ogilvy and Mather. Shelley has a chemical engineering undergraduate degree from BITS Pilani, an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, an MPhil and PhD in marketing from New York University. Prior to moving to US to do his PhD in late 80s and early 90s, Shelley worked for United Breweries, FCB Ulka, and Mudra Communication. And he was the youngest branch head at that point in time in advertising industry. So that's Shelley. Welcome, Shelley. Let me introduce you Dr. S.K. Salwan, a noted academician and a scientist. Dr. Salwan, he was the first Vice Chancellor of ASU in 2010, and currently he is the Principal Advisor to the Chairman of Apeejay Education Society. Dr. Salwan has also served as Vice Chancellor of Punjab Technical University, Jalandhar. An expert of strategic defense and defense technology, Dr. Salwan has been the founder member of Integrated Guided Missile Development Program of Defense Research under the leadership of Dr. Apj Abdul Kalam. Dr. Salwan was awarded Scientist of the Year Award in 1992. In 2009, he was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award by DRDO for invaluable contribution in defense technology and strategic defense. In 2016, Dr. Salwan received India's eminent Vice Chancellor Award by All India Council of Human Rights, Liberties and Social Justice. Welcome, sir. Professor Ashok Ogra is the founder director of Apeejay Institute of Mass Communication, and he is currently the advisor to mass communication. Professor Ogra has around 40 years of experience and association with the industry. Professor Ogra is an excellent professional, academician, voracious reader, writer, art critic, involved in various cultural activities, an excellent human being with a lot of compassion. Professor Ogra, during his tenure, has served Doordarshan as its director, and also he was the vice president of Discovery Channel and instrumental in launching Discovery in India. Professor Ogra was a member of various selection committee for various film festivals and has also served as jury member of the prestigious National Film Awards. He has also worked as associate professor at reputed Film and TV Institute, Pune. Well, good morning, sir, and welcome. And I will request Dr. Salwan to inaugurate the session and say a few words, followed by Professor Ogra to introduce the topic to all the audience. Thank you, sir. Dr. Salwan, sir.
Thank you very much for introducing and putting as a panelist. We are indeed grateful to Professor Shelley for having agreed to give us on this topic as a one of the renowned person in advertising, and this we are indeed grateful to him to have spared certain time to be with us. I welcome him to this webinar and hope that we will all enjoy it and we'll all get benefited by it. Thank you.
Professor Ogra, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Salwan. Such a pleasure to have you with us. You're our mentor. I would also like to welcome, as I see on the chat box, Dr. Mithilesh Singh, OSD to Chancellor and involved in education policy planning. Dr. Kunduja, Professor Amit Sareen, Dr. Bagga, Sanjay Airwal, and many others. And of course, across the country, we have already crossed around 450. Good morning to everybody. It is indeed a pleasure for me to introduce the broad theme of what we expect from this presentation. I can assure you that I will try and speak slightly longer than my introduction. Now there are two operative words in the presentation of the title, advertising and brands. So in a sense, what it communicates is there is strong association with advertising and brands. Perhaps I would request Professor Jain to also reflect on the fact that there are brands which have emerged on top of the world, but haven't come because of advertising. And Body Shop is one such example. It doesn't advertise. Microsoft till recent time would never advertise. Walmart advertises only half of its competitor, but its sales is 4 times its immediate competitor. But the fact is that advertising continues to be a critical part of how we build the brands. People don't buy brands. People buy products. But people buy into brands. And therefore, product is a byproduct of a brand, which contains the DNA of both what the product is and what the parentage is and what the reputation is. So goes beyond what the product is. Luckily in India, we had the glorious tradition in advertising, both in terms of media planning, account planning, also in creativity. And to frame it in brief, if we go back to 1950, some of the two iconic ads which stand out is Dalda and Surf. Now the Dalda was the first product that would brand ghee, which was otherwise unregulated, sold in the normal grocery shop. And it had tremendous, it needed tremendous advertising to convince the consumer that they can brand a product like ghee. But the most important thing that happened in the 50s was with regard to Surf. When Surf came in, till such time, people would generally wash the cloth directly under tap or at the pond or the river. And when Surf came in, then obviously you needed a bucket, because then you had to put Surf in it. And that is when the company decided that along with Surf, they will also sell a bucket at a discounted rate. So it became Surf cum bucket. Till such time, the behavior of the people got used to Surf, and obviously then we know what happened with Surf in the 80s, and it continues to be an iconic brand. But the glorious period of, if the glorious period of Indian cinema was the 50s, I think the glorious period of Indian advertising, and Shally and Sajal were both there at that time, was 1980s, and I happened to be the controller, more as a censor and a facilitator than otherwise, was when we had iconic ads like I'm Rasna, I'm a Complan boy and a girl, or you had the little advertising coming in. And we saw advertising moving from pure, I'm the best, I'm the brightest, I'm the largest, to a more internalized feeling of the consumers. And seeing advertising what the consumer wants to experience. And I think the ultimate climax of the creative was what I would call the advertising, which related to Vodafone of Zuzu commercial. And of course, I must admit the commercial like Fevicol. The Fevicol just doesn't mention in the advertising copy the product, but it only comes at the end. But the critical thing remains that why do brands fail? And let me, I have done a bit of work on that. I have spoken at many seminars and workshops on that. Is brands fail essentially of various 4 or 5 reasons. One is the brand ego. The brand, or perhaps first is the brand amnesia. The brand amnesia comes in when a particular brand forgets why did it come into the being in the first place? What was the mission of that brand? What did it stand for? And a classic example of brand amnesia failing is with Coke itself. When Pepsi came in and it appealed to younger generation, then Coke said, oh, we need to target younger generation, because Coke was seen more as part of the American 1950s, emergence. And they came up with a product called New Coke. It failed. So this is called the brand amnesia of one, you're extending that, you're deviating from what your brand mandate is supposed to be. The other is the brand ego. And that's the critical one. And we have an example of Polaroid. When they came in instant photography, they thought this is now the final word in photography. And they didn't change. And then the rest is all, what happened. The third, of course, is the brand fatigue sometimes. Because the brands are doing well, the products are doing well, and the brand managers think, why even think of reinventing oneself when we are doing well, not realizing that the competition is emerging. The example from wildlife is incredible. Till such time the cheetah makes the kill for the prey, you always feel that the prey is increasing the distance till cheetah makes that last leap and catches the prey. That's the same what happens in competition with brands. But what happens in the fatigue comes in and you tend to take it for granted. The other critical example that I saw in the last 10 years is the brand, what I call Parounia, which happened with Patanjali. Levers and P&G didn't know how to handle with the onset of Patanjali and the rise of Patanjali. And you got a sense that as the brand strategy of both Levers and others was being driven by what the competitor was doing rather than the other way around. And the last, of course, is the brand irrelevance. And brand irrelevance is particularly critical now because of technology. And we had the initial phase of the brand irrelevance when Kodak failed. Kodak, in the brand audit, which comes every year, Kodak, Disney, Kodak, Disney, National Geographic Magazine, and Discovery Communication with Discovery channels used to be in the top 10, and then was Coke and others. And such a powerful brand that Kodak was. But that led to its demise, but they didn't take the technology into consideration, and the rest is history. But the essential in terms of the people, and we have a lot of teachers here, who will be teaching brand management, is basically also to take into consider the cultural factors. So therefore, when Kellogg's came in 94, 95, I remember meeting the brand manager at that time. And but it didn't succeed in India because they came with cold cereals. The Indian consumers used to having something hot, paratha or whatever hot or really hot in the morning and not cold cereals. The other could be the people failure, where the management doesn't know how to, and that's also a PR failure, doesn't know and negotiate the failures, which is in the case of the British oil. But the critical one is when companies don't do well, the first thing they do is to engage advertising agencies and go for rebranding. And it fails. And the classic example is the British Airways, when they decided to change their colors from the Union Jack colors to more international, and it failed. And the person who took advantage of it was Richard Branson. He used the same colors that the British Airways gave up. and the rest is history. Now, of course, with the digital ecosystem, everything is changing. So we need how attention being a casualty. In the good old days, you would remember the logos, how critical are logos in this visual clutter that we see. Can we ever even remember none of the logos? Do people remember the taglines anymore? We still remember the jingles of the 80s, Nirma, and so on and so forth. But do you remember any of the jingles of the recent times? So these are some of the issues which I would like Shaili to take, and he combines the experience of both Indian and the global experience. And before we started, I was having a chat with him. I said, if you could give Indian examples, that would be wonderful. He would speak for around 40-45 minutes, and we expect that we would have some time with him for question and answer. Please use Q&A for question and answer. And may I also request everybody to kindly, of course, the host would have done it, to mute themselves. And if the questions can be less of explanation, more of questions, one-liners, that would be wonderful. And if there are too many questions, perhaps we may like to club some of those questions, or you could forward those questions on the email, which I would request the host to kindly, it is given there. You can send your questions and we can also connect with Shaili later. So great pleasure, Shaili, and the floor is entirely yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ogra. Okay, so should we get the slide deck? Okay, great. Okay, good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome from the Emerald City, Seattle. I just thought I'll give you a glimpse of the town that I live in with my wife and daughter. So what you see here is the Space Needle. So let me start out. So this is a view from the University of Washington, from the university that I work at. This is a view of Seattle. You see Space Needle, you see Mount Rainier. And I'm really, really happy to be here talking to you from 8,000 miles away. I just learned about, this talk from Sajal. Sajal and I have been connected over WhatsApp, the miracles of technology. We go back 30 years when we were colleagues at Mudra, and I'm really grateful we connected again, and I'm grateful to Apeejay Institute. It's only a 17-year-old institute, and it's already made a great name for itself in the landscape of mass communication within India. I really need to share this with you. I hope you're all staying safe. These are very troubled and very challenging times. And not to minimize the seriousness of the situation, there are two golden rules: listen to your mother and listen to your wife. And that's what is a good thing to do. Okay, so let me start out. What I'm going to do today is talk about this phenomenon, which I call good brands gone bad. The technical jargon for this phenomenon is called brand transgressions. Now, what exactly do I mean when I say good brands gone bad? So I'll talk about the case of this brand. Some of you probably recognize this logo. It's the broken logo of Volkswagen. Now, Volkswagen is a German brand, and it is the largest selling brand in the world right now in automobiles. It sells 11 million vehicles a year. Unfortunately for Volkswagen, a few years back, it hit a road bump, and the road bump was as follows. It was found that Volkswagen had installed a software which reported emissions which were lower than the emissions actually were. And they were basically trying to cheat or beat the system. This came to be known as the Dieselgate, and it was involving the largest automobile brand in the world, which was Volkswagen. So this is an example of a good brand gone bad, or a brand transgressing on certain norms which have been defined legally. Let's look at another case of a slightly different kind of a transgression. This is the transgression. You see this young boy, and some of you probably know the brand called H&M. H&M is a famous retailer selling clothes, and they had this advertisement where they showed this African-American boy wearing a hoodie, and the hoodie said, "Coolest monkey in the jungle." Now, for some cultures, calling a little child monkey is probably okay and even endearing, But to the African American community, it is real blasphemy. And it kind of reminds them of certain stereotypes which they have literally grown into over the last several centuries of what they believe is oppression. So when H&M released this advertisement, there was a nosebleed that the brand got on social media. And this is just one particular instance. H&M slammed as racist for monkey in the jungle hoodie. A similar transgression was committed by one of the most well-known brands on the planet, which is also in my backyard, which is Starbucks. So Starbucks, what happened in the case of Starbucks was that two African-American men entered a store, a Starbucks coffee shop in Philadelphia. They wanted to use the restroom, and the barista said, "Are you going to buy something?" They said no, so the barista did not allow them to use the store, and they called the cops. Unfortunately for Starbucks, that became a nightmare. And you see hashtag enough shame on your Starbucks. Below that, hashtag BLM, which stands for Black Lives Matter. So these two transgressions represent violations of certain social norms. Let's look at some more examples of transgressions so that we are all on the same page and we get an idea of the broad range of transgressions that the world sees in business. Johnson & Johnson, a very loved brand, what I call a good brand, had to face some serious problem when a woman claimed that its talcum powder was causing cancer had caused cancer in her body because of asbestos. Johnson & Johnson extremely strongly rebutted her claims. Unfortunately for the company, several more consumers came forward making the same allegation until a point came where Johnson & Johnson had to settle the case. This is another case of a good brand gone bad. So many of us probably know that in 2018, there were two flight crashes. The first one was on 29th October 2018, Indonesian Airlines, one of its flights crashed and it killed 189 people. A lot of people thought this was because of the airlines' bad planning, bad production, and bad operations. Unfortunately, another crash happened within 6 months of this incident, where Ethiopian Airlines had a crash which killed 157 passengers. This happened on March 10th, 2019. Two crashes within a matter of 6 months raised a lot of red flags. And when people started scrutinizing these incidents, they found a common factor across these two incidents, which was that they were both Boeing 737 MAX jets. As the inquiry got deeper and more facts started coming out, people started alleging that it was really Boeing's fault rather than the fault of one of these airlines. Initially, Boeing rejected this hypothesis, and they went around saying that it was really, there was a problem with the airlines and so on and so forth. But the inquiry got deeper, more and more evidence came out, and even though we don't have a firm ruling, we do not have all the facts. But what we have understood at this point in time is that much of the problem lay at the end of Boeing. And Boeing has posted its first loss since 1997 after this debacle. Here is closer home in India. We know about Satyam's situation, the company Satyam Computers, where there was some financial scandal which rocked the company to the point where the company was taken over by Mahindra & Mahindra, and today it has come to be known as Mahindra Satyam. And then there is the case of our beloved Maggi. When I was in India, working in India, Maggi was this amazing brand which could not do anything wrong. Then in 2015, there were allegations, as many of us know, that Maggi noodles were alleged to contain more lead than was permitted. And this excessive lead ostensibly was bad for health. The reason why this became such an issue was partly because Maggi was targeted at children. it was a food product, and if it was true that it had more lead than permitted, then it directly impacted the health of children, and consequently, it would have impacted families psychologically. So for almost 2 or 3 years, Maggi had to fight this allegation, and many of us know that when the dust settled down, Maggi came out clean, but during those 3 years, it really faced a lot of challenges and some serious trouble. Besides its profits being hit, its reputation got a huge dent. A week back, literally 5 days back, I read about this mobile giant called Xiaomi from China. It seems that it is recording millions of people's private web and phone use. It is not yet proven to be true, and we will see where this good brand gone bad is. Has it really gone bad, or is it just a rumor? We will see. But coupled with COVID, coupled with the rumors around China being the origin of COVID and Xiaomi being a Chinese brand, I think at this point in time, I'm speculating here, which is not a good thing to do, but I think the cards are not stacked in favor of Xiaomi at this point in time. Now, this discussion will not be complete if we don't talk about this gentleman or this guy. Some of you recognize this man. His name is Harvey Weinstein, and he was a very famous producer in Hollywood. Very wealthy guy, one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. And he was the recipient of several awards, including an Oscar. And his word was treated as gospel in some circles. He was also in March, on October 2017, the New Yorker magazine and the New York Times reported that over a dozen women had alleged that he had engaged in sexual misconduct with them. Some of these women are current as well as aspiring actresses, and some well-known Oscar-winning ones. Allegations of sexual misconduct against several well-known people were also there before in the media, but for some reason, when Harvey Weinstein's case came to light, the entire world galvanized into what has come to be known as the Me Too movement. And in India, according to Economic Times, the Me Too movement really hit its tracks in 2018. So why am I showing this particular little case study? This is the case of a human brand gone bad. Okay, so now that we've seen multiple examples which cut across types of transgression, which cut across countries, which cut across the seriousness of the transgression, let me just define the title of the talk, which is When Good Brands Go Bad, or a consumer side examination of brand transgressions. What do I mean by a consumer side examination? So a company has multiple stakeholders. I've given you a very simple schematic of its stakeholders in this slide. There are internal stakeholders and there are external stakeholders. A brand that is owned by a company, in theory, can violate or trust the norms of one or more of these stakeholders. It can do something wrong vis-a-vis its employees, its managers, its owners, suppliers, society, government, what have you. My interest, being my research is in consumer psychology, I'll be looking at the phenomenon of brand transgressions from the viewpoint of consumers. So the focus is on the consumer and how do consumers perceive these transgressions? How do they respond to them? And what are some consequences of these transgressions? And what can companies do in terms of what I call recovery strategies? So let's first briefly define what a brand transgression is so that we are all on the same page. A brand transgression is some kind of a violation of a rule. There is an implicit rule, there is an explicit rule, and these rules are the basis on which consumers have relationships with brands, and they judge brands in terms of their performance. When a brand violates these rules, we call it a transgression. And oftentimes these transgressions involve all kinds of different kinds of incidents. We saw 7 or 8 examples in the preceding part of this talk. And these kinds of incidents could be product failure, they could be bad service, they could be violations of social codes, they could be legal violations, there could be multiple area of violations. And oftentimes these brand transgressions serve as defining moments. They are, they are the tipping points which create a division between the past and the future. And the future is oftentimes touched with significantly negative consequences, both financial and psychological. So let's look at some consequences of brand transgressions. Let's first understand, why are we talking about brand transgressions? Do they matter? Are they really as bad as we make them out to be? Or are we really wasting our time? So there are sometimes little or no consequence of a brand transgression. The two examples that I'm going to talk about very briefly are those of United Airlines and Starbucks that we just talked about. Now, United Airlines over the last 3-4 years has had repetitive transgressions. For some reason, something or the other wrong is going on in airlines operations. There was a news article where there was a new piece of news with by a passenger died in its storage compartment on one of its flights. It's a pet for a passenger, and pets, as we know, can be part of family, which can be pretty hurtful. Another incident came to light where United passengers, the crew threw out a passenger for whatever reason, and a photograph which became which went viral, was this passenger was bleeding from his nose and face. Then they misplaced somebody's baggage which was not found, and so on and so forth. But for some reason, United Airlines did not have any serious damage to deal with. If you recall, I shared with you the incident with Starbucks in Philadelphia. In the United States, where this event is situated, the notion of racial bias is extremely triggering. It's extremely sensitive, an issue. And Starbucks basically came out with virtually no wound at all from this incident. And we'll talk about later precisely why, because of what Starbucks did, that the damage to them was minimal. So one extreme end is minimum to no damage. Then there could be reputational damage. We talked about Maggi. Maggi's reputation got damaged. According to some research studies, Maggi noodles' score on the factor trust was severely hurt after the allegation that it contained more lead than was permitted. We will see how Xiaomi's reputation develops over the next few weeks, depending on the extent to which the privacy issue surrounds the brand. Then there is financial loss. There could be a small financial loss, or there could be a gargantuan financial loss. Volkswagen, that we talked about, has already spent $31 billion in damages, which it has paid mostly to regulators, to countries, and also to customers, as well as its dealers and suppliers. Boeing, last that I checked, which was yesterday, has been fined or has paid $18.7 billion in damages to airlines and a host of its stakeholders, and I don't believe it has yet seen the end of the road. So financial consequences can be non-trivial. Then may be legal, political, and financial issues. In addition to financial, there could be legal issues, there could be political issues. This is the case of a company called Petrobras. I hope I pronounced it right. Petrobras was Brazil's flagship company. It was Brazil, it was Brazil's pride. It was symbolism of Brazilian pride. It was a company. And sometime in the last 7 years, it was discovered that a lot of financial scandal that the company was involved in. Basically, some other corporations, CEOs of other corporations, were bribing Petrobras's people with contracts and favors. That was just the tip of the iceberg. As the inquiry got deeper and deeper and deeper, the head of the country, the president of the country, was alleged to be involved, and a number of politicians, a number of CEOs, and so on and so forth, were caught in this net of the cops, of the inquiring people in Brazil. And as a consequence, not only was Petrobras hit severely, the entire economy of Brazil, the entire government institutions of Brazil got a severe dent and got severely damaged, starting with Petrobras. And then the worst case is you pretty much the game is over. So Enron, we know Enron financial scandal, accounting scandal. Satyam Computers doesn't exist anymore. The Harvey Weinstein company, which was owned by Harvey Weinstein, went bankrupt a couple of years back when it became pretty clear that there was really no comeback from the allegations that its owner was facing. So you see these consequences from none to bankruptcy to closure and everything in between. There could be a wide array of consequences that brands can face and companies can face when they are dealing with transgressions of different kinds. So now let us see, at least if you are an astute manager and if you're thinking, what if my brand is transgressing? Or if you're thinking, when I get a job, what if my brand is going to transgress? There are some factors which we have found which predict what kind of consequence you can expect. Let's look at those factors which are research-based. I just want to, sort of throw in a note of gratitude to the tens of researchers whose research papers I've read, based on which this presentation has been formed. It is not all my work. Some of it is mine, but most of it is the work of these people who are much, much smarter than I am. So I'm going to look at the factors that drive brand transgression consequences. And there are 5 buckets in which I have put these factors so that we can understand the framework or the structure here. There are macroeconomic considerations. There are the type of transgression matters. What is the type of transgression you're talking about? Is it a social transgression? Is it a financial transgression? Is it a product failure? What is it? That matters in terms of the nature of consequences. Then the characteristics of the brand matter. What kind of a brand are we talking about? And finally, the characteristics of the relationship between the brand and the consumer matter. So I'm going to now tease apart these 5 buckets of factors that drive brand transgression consequences. Let's first look at macroeconomic factors. So there are basically 3 broad macroeconomic factors: basic, demand, supply considerations. So in the case of United, I believe the reason why United Airlines did not face the music, did not get severe damage, is because it was not easily substitutable. It did not have as much competition, which could have hurt it pretty severely. So there was demand, there was supply of, there wasn't enough supply of airlines, there was a huge demand. So if United did some transgressions, there was this sort of, reluctant willingness to forgive United. Now, Uber, some of us have been using Uber, many of us have used Uber. In the United States alone, in 2018 and 2019, Uber is documented to have had 6,000 sexual assaults in its rides. Both drivers and passengers have been harmed in the process. Somebody will wake up and say, how come this company is still existing? Well, there are many, many reasons, but one of them, I believe, is the demand-supply consideration. Uber is an extremely cost-effective alternative to taxi, and there is not enough competition. Therefore, Uber has a very strong position in the marketplace. Now, in the case of Petrobras, one of the factors which is usually a red flag early in a transgression is how does the stock market respond? So if your brand has committed a transgression and the stock market is punishing you, and your stock has fallen precipitously, significantly, it is the harbinger of things to come. So that's what we've found in research, that an early signal of the severity of the consequence is the extent to which the stock market punishes a brand transgression. And the third factor, which is kind of macro, but not really, but I have put it under the macroeconomic bucket, is how long the time the media spends. How much time does the media spend on covering the transgression? The more time the media spends on covering the transgression, you can be absolutely certain this transgression is non-trivial in the eyes of the media and the public and the society and potentially the policymakers. A very, really interesting example is that of SeaWorld. So some of us might know SeaWorld is a amusement park where animals from the sea are on display. For the most part, there are other kinds of animals on display as well. In 2013, some people made a documentary called Blackfish, and Blackfish featured killer whales which were used by SeaWorld for entertainment. And not to belabor this point, because we don't have a lot of time, but basically that documentary was the start for SeaWorld's problems to start emerging. The documentary showed that these killer whales were really not being taken care of. They were being abused by SeaWorld for human entertainment. And to discredit SeaWorld, they did not appreciate the severity of this allegation, and they kept denying it. They kept camouflaging it for 3 or 4 years until they finally had to admit, and they stopped this exhibit. But by that time, a lot of damage had been done. And on one pretext or the other, SeaWorld and Blackfish kept appearing in media. It just wouldn't go away. Let's look at transgression characteristics. One of the classic characteristics which have been researched, and it's kind of it's a low-hanging fruit, is the severity of the transgression. The more severe the transgression, the more severe the consequences. Maggi, despite what I understand was not its fault, it faced a severe allegation because it was a food product and it could potentially hurt health of children, which is why I call it a severe transgression. I think Harvey Weinstein was a severe transgression because he violated some sacred sexual boundaries of people as it was discovered. So that is one characteristic of transgression that a manager needs to be sensitive about and to understand how severe is the transgression that we're talking about. Another characteristic of a transgression which is important to understand is whether the transgression is of omission or whether it is of commission. Now let me explain to you what I mean by omission and commission. A transgression of omission is kind of like a mistake. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. It was an honest mistake. Versus a transgression of commission, where it is found that the company volitionally engaged in a transgression. No surprises, a transgression of commission is punished more severely than a transgression of omission. Please bear in mind that both of them are punished when we are talking of commercial brands, but commission transgressions are punished more than omission transgressions. Now let's look at brand characteristics and consumer characteristics. If a brand has a strong reputation that works as a cushion, that works as its equity cushion, which protects it from severity of consequences. So even though we talked about the fact that Volkswagen has cost it $31 billion and counting, the fact is that Volkswagen sales dipped only during the year where the transgression came to light. After that, it has gone up and up and up and up and up. Why are Volkswagen sales not hurt, despite the fact that it was found to have lied to people? The reason is, I believe, one of the reasons is that it is a very strong, reputed brand. Let's look at the case of Starbucks. Why was Starbucks not damaged by that incident of racial bias? It was partly because Starbucks is a terrific brand, it's very reputed, very strong brand, partly because how it responded to the transgression. As soon as the incident came to light, the CEO, I think his name is Kenny, he immediately apologized profusely and he shut down 8,000 Starbucks stores in the United States. It hit the company pretty bad in terms of profit. And they went on a racial bias train.
We just have another 15-20 minutes so as to take the question answer, so as to make it interactive. So at some punctuation point, maybe in next 2-3 slides, then we could also invite questions.
Good idea. Yeah, I think I've got about 2 or 3 more slides.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Which I will talk about. I'll finish this particular framework and we will.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. Then the third characteristic of a brand is, we talk about brand personality. Whether it is a warm brand or whether it is a competent brand. A warm brand, I think, is a brand like Maggi, which people love. It's a family brand, it's a kid's brand, and there is a lot of warmth around the brand. A competent brand is a brand which is functional, which performs its function in a very utilitarian way. So what we found is that consumers punish competent brands more than warm brands. So there is some connection that consumers develop with warm brands, which serves as another cushion. Another interesting finding is this notion of brand power and consumers' belief in social hierarchies. So culturally, the world can be looked at as two big cultures. I know this is a huge simplification, so just indulge me. There is a culture which believes in hierarchy. So there is a pecking order, there is a food chain. And then there's a culture which believes everybody is equal. What we found is cultures which believe in hierarchical ordering in a food chain, if a powerful brand commits a transgression, they forgive that brand. But if the culture is one where there are no hierarchies, they don't care a damn. They will punish any brand, whether it is a powerful brand or a weak brand. The strength of the relationship matters. If we are very, very close to a brand, it's part of our system, part of our value system, then consumers don't punish the brand as much. If we are in a communal relationship with the brand where it is part of a community, we don't punish it as much. If it is an exchange relationship, which is purely economic, then we punish it a lot more. Okay, let me jump to the last couple of slides, which are really important.
If you could just have one or two slides, Shelley, because we are running short, because there are a lot of questions we want to take. Maybe one or two, and we can integrate some of the slides into your answers. Sorry.
Sure. So this is the case of Tylenol. Short. Some crazy person injected cyanide in some bottles of Tylenol, and all these were in Chicago. 7 consumers died. It was very clear, very early, it was clear that it was not the company's fault. And this was a brand transgression. Now, the actions which the company took are what really make for an incredible learning lesson. This is what the company did. It was Johnson & Johnson, which owned Tylenol. The CEO apologized profusely, complete responsibility they assumed, even though they were not at fault. That is key. They recalled 31 million bottles of Tylenol, and they destroyed all the product that was recalled. They set up a toll-free line for consumers to report grievances. There was a thorough re-examination of their manufacturing and supply chain. They delved into R&D to find ways to prevent these incidents from occurring. And the CEO of the company featured in 50 advertisements in 50 days to reassure consumers that they're doing their best to solve the problem. This cost the company in 1982 $100 million. As a consequence of this effort, the world was introduced to tamper-proof packaging, which we all use in our medication nowadays. The brand trust went up, it spiked up, and the company's share, which was 35% before this incident, and had fallen to 8% after this incident, went up to 48% after the steps were taken. It was seen as a perpetrator of this transgression. After this whole exercise, it was seen as a victim of a mad human being. The lesson that I would like to share here is that a brand which transgresses and addresses it not to save its skin, not to save money, not to make money, but to genuinely respond to consumer welfare is the brand which recovers relatively quickly. Okay, I'm going to stop because we don't have a lot of time. Thank you for listening to my monologue. I would love to take some questions.
That was wonderful, Shelley, such wonderful presentation. For short of time, I think we have to run through. I would also like to acknowledge Shelley for your session, our respected Vice Chancellor, Professor R.S. Danka of Apeejay Satiate University, Professor Sanjay Agarwal, Dean of School of Journalism, XNTV, and many others. Now we have questions. There is one question from Saifullah who says, how does one manage the brand efficiently and effectively?
How does one manage a brand efficiently and effectively? I don't have a short answer to this question. What I'm going to say is, this is my understanding, so please keep it as a single person's opinion. There are lots of different people who have opinions about how to manage brands. But you probably, that marketing has a certain framework. We look at the competition, we consider consumers, we consider internal situation, macro market context, so on and so forth. Based on this analysis, we decide on a segmentation strategy and a targeting and a positioning strategy. And then we look into what we call the 4 Ps: product, price, promotion, place, right? So those are the moving parts of a marketing strategy framework. When we do this repetitively and successfully, when we keep doing this repetitively and successfully, we end up with a successful brand. What starts out as a small brand, which nobody has heard of, becomes a gargantuan brand, a strong brand, a successful brand, like BMW, like Amul, like Borolin, like Surf that we were talking about. So it is not a cookie cutter solution. It is a painstaking process which management and companies have to commit to following day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, for them to have brands which are managed efficiently and effectively.
Oh, that's wonderful. We have Dr. Amit saying that it's a very relevant question. Shelley, what should advertisers keep in mind during COVID situation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So these are my 2 cents. COVID is, let me look at COVID from a marketing viewpoint. I realize the crisis that humanity is facing, the world is facing, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But from a marketing perspective, I think it'll be good for marketers, not just advertisers, and marketers to realize that there is a lot of psychological, there's a lot of mental health issues that the world is facing. Consumers are, I read somewhere that 25 to 30% of consumers, people are experiencing acute levels of anxiety. There's a lot of stress, relationships are breaking. Of course, we know that people are falling sick, people are dying. So all our strategies must have empathy for the reality of the consumer from that perspective. That's number one. Number two, yeah, it is possible to look at it as an opportunity because certain products consumers will demand more during COVID. But once COVID is lifted, their demands will change. So some advertisers and marketers could potentially exploit that gap at this point in time. I will personally feel a little icky about it because there are some ethical overtones to that. But yes, some people are doing that. I'm doing a study right now about the appropriateness. It's not advertising related, it's marketing related, about the appropriateness of price gouging. And what we are finding is that some people are completely okay with firms charging very, very high price from consumers at these times because there is a huge demand and there is shortage, there is a supply issue. By the same token, another study that I'm conducting, we are finding that China, with all the rumors around China having this, association with Wuhan and the virus coming from China, we don't know the truth yet. At least I don't know the truth yet. Some people are punishing China, saying, I won't buy their products. Some people are saying, I don't care. China did what is right for them, and I'm going to buy their products. So there are all these different opinions and things like that emerging. My abstract suggestion will be try not to be exploitative at this time because we are dealing with a very sensitive situation which the world has never, ever dealt with in the past.
Thank you, Shali. This is Dr. Mithilesh Singh, my colleague, saying what are some of the things you can do to protect yourself against an attack on your brand? How do you take the steps to build and restore your brand's bad reputation? What he perhaps means is if the brand was good and it is under attack and has suffered, how does it recover from that?
Yeah. So I apologize, Dr. Mithilesh. Some of my slides, which I had to rush through, captured exactly what you were saying. So I don't want to go back into those slides. But these are not scientifically proven facts. But some recovery strategies include compensating the consumers. Another strategy is apologizing to the consumers. A third strategy is denying that you did anything wrong. In my understanding, whatever research I have read, whatever case studies I have read, denial almost always doesn't work. It almost never works. So even if the company is not at fault, my 2 cents are that take responsibility, even if you're not accountable, take responsibility and try to solve the consumer's problem rather than try to hide under saying, hey, I didn't do it, and so leave me alone. That's number one that I talk about. Another thing that I talk about is the concept of brand authenticity. Authenticity is not simply what you see is what you get, right? So you could see ugliness, and you get ugliness does not make it authentic, does not make it attractive. So an authentic brand, there are some dimensions or pillars to what an authentic brand is. It must be credible, it must be honest and transparent, it must have integrity, it must have heritage, and it must be unique. So Amul, I think, is a brand which is in India's marketplace, has deep heritage. Some of you probably know about Amul's history. It started out with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, then Morarji Desai got involved, then of course Mr. Kurian got involved, then Shyam Benegal made the movie called Manthan, which was based on the milk farmers and so on and so forth. And Amul has been a brand which has been in the Indian marketplace for almost 60, 70 years. I consider this to be a brand with amazing heritage, excellent heritage from all kinds of perspectives. And credibility refers to delivering the promise again and again and again with almost 100% predictability. Consumers know exactly what they're going to get, and they get it, and they get what they want. And I think a classic example is Borolin, which I think is a highly credible brand. So there are two sides to protecting your brand. One is pre-transgression, where I think you can work on your brand authenticity, make it a credible brand, make it a unique brand, try to build heritage into it, make it transparent and trustworthy. And then post-transgression, in terms of what you need to do to respond when you are attacked. So I'll give you a small case of Boeing. When Boeing 737 MAX came to light, which was in around March, April of last year, Boeing, in all its wisdom or whatever, denied it. They said, we are not at fault. It was the airlines who were at fault. And when I read this in the local newspaper in Seattle, I said, oops, they screwed up. That's my belief. The CEO of the company ultimately had to be let go in December, and the situation became deeper and deeper and deeper, and Boeing is right now in a deep rabbit hole. My hypothetical belief is that if they had acknowledged, taken responsibility and said, we will do something about it because 340 people have died, we will do something about it, I think the consequences and outcomes would have been different. So post-transgression, one thing that I'm going to suggest with some caution is to take responsibility and work damn hard at consumer safety.
Yeah, that's what. But may I add a brief on that, Shelley? Because there is a question on Union Carbide, and what Dr. Mithlesh asked is in relation to Union Carbide and British Oil. Union Carbide did not pay attention to compensation, whereas British Oil did manage to compensate for the Gulf, for the oil leak, and in a sense has been over a period of 2-3 years since that happened, managed to recover its brand image. We have Professor Piyush Datta. He's of course elaborating on the same of relationship between of Maggi versus Cadbury. Thank you. You're elaborating. There's an interesting question that how come that Patanjali is more popular in North than in South?
I really have to apologize. I'm not totally, into the Indian market.
Let me reframe the question. Why is it that there are certain products which have more brand loyalty in North than South? BPL is an example. Of course, now BPL is no more what it was, but I'm talking BPL of the 80s and the early 90s.
Yeah, from a conceptual viewpoint, consumers get loyal to brands because the brands converge with some sense of values of the consumers. They perform functionally very well. Consumers become emotionally attached to the brands, and so on and so forth. So that is the broad guiding principle. Within that guiding principle, the values align and the emotions are in the right place, and the functionality is something that appeals to the consumers. And these brands keep appealing to the consumers again and again and again. There could be some competitive angle in the sense that some brands are marketed very aggressively in some parts of the country or the world than others, and by default or by design, they become more entrenched in those markets versus markets they're not present. Then there's a consumer side, which I just shared with you. So there could be a number of reasons why brands appeal to consumers, one segment of consumers versus another segment of consumers.
Yeah, I think Shelley, that was wonderful. I think the last question obviously must go to social media. Last few words about the relationship of advertising in the context of the total ecosystem that is emerging.
Could you repeat the question, please, sir?
I'm saying with the onset of the digital, happening. So, what would be the brand versus that relationship, in which the attention is becoming a scarce commodity?
Yeah, so attention is becoming a scarce commodity. On the other hand, the spread of social media is something that I think brands will be very wise to take notice of. And in my own class, I talk about the absolute critical need for transparency. So I think this is becoming a movement, at least in the United States, where consumers are demanding more and more transparency from brands and companies, and so on and so forth. In the case of SeaWorld, I'll give you a quick example. When SeaWorld's transgression came to light, that they were mistreating the killer whales, and they were treating the animals in not a very humane manner. SeaWorld, its reputation on social media was showing a very positive spike. And I don't remember the numbers, but some 2,000-3,000 positive reviews were posted, and it was discovered that more than 50-60% of them were posted by SeaWorld's employees. So the point I'm trying to make is those days are gone when you can hoodwink people, and because people are not blind anymore, people are connected. And if brands lack transparency, I think they will lack authenticity. And if that authenticity is compromised, they are gambling with a potential transgression. And my guess is the cost of dealing with those transgressions for those brands which are not transparent will be higher than for brands which are transparent.
I think that's why the heritage matters, whether you continue with the heritage of transparency. Any transgression along the way would perhaps cost you dearly, and we have so many examples.
Yes, credibility, honesty, integrity, all those matter because of social media. Absolutely. I think social media is pushing the brands to become more authentic and more
therefore the lesson is brand is a personality which has a DNA. We need to protect each part of that DNA, and in fact continue to strengthen that DNA. Like the human beings, like the wildlife, we need to keep adopting and evolving. And the best example is of the candle industry. When Thomas Edison invented the bulb, everybody thought this is the end of the candles. But today we make more candles than we ever did in the world of higher value, because the candles are evolved into a fashion statement. We have another example of the horses as much. So I think the issue is, how do brands also adjust? They are not frozen entities. Brands have to be dynamic. Brands have to be inventors as they go along. If you stay too much with the heritage, you have the danger of the brand ego and amnesia coming in. But if you stay in touch with what is happening, perhaps the future belongs to those brands. Shelly, we have just 30 seconds. I can only tell you it was such illuminating. We have a lot of questions, including on neuroscience, which was expected. What we'll try and do is to collect all these questions and try and send these questions to you and forward it to you. I would also like to thank Professor Sajal Mukherjee, the director of the Apeejay Institute of Mass Communication, and all my colleagues there for putting this together. And Shelly, this is the beginning of a relationship. For us, you are a brand, and we have bought into your brand, and we expect with the Zoom technology, as we begin the new session, we would have you more regularly. And of course, when you are in India, we would love to have you over to our Dwarka campus, which also has the Apeejay School of Management, which offers MBA, and of course, the Mass Communication and Journalism. Thank you.
I'll be honored. Thank you.
It's such pleasure. And thank you, Piyush, Rajiv, Naveen, Jaya, the faculty of Apeejay Institute of Mass Communication for putting this all together. And thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.